There we go.
There we go.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, welcome everyone. And I'm Dr. Megan Aston, Director of the Center for Transformative Nursing and Health Research. And I'm here with Julie Berry, our
Okay.
coordinator, research. And these are our Wednesdays at noon. So I would like to start with a land acknowledgement to just take a moment to reflect and know that we are here in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people who've been here for over 11,000 years. And also to recognize our African Nova Scotian people who have been here for over 400 years, and to recognize all of our contributions as a treaty of friendship. And as we move forward to address truth and reconciliation, I'm always thankful that we can take a moment of time at the beginning of our meetings to reflect and to make a commitment here. So thank you to everyone, and thank you for being here. So absolutely thrilled to introduce Lisa Bland, one of our graduate students in the master's program in nursing. And I'm just going to turn it over to you, Lisa. I know you can share your screen. I'm
Okay.
assuming you have some
Yeah,
PowerPoint
great.
presentations, and yeah, you'll take us through for however long you would like. So thank you
Okay,
so much
wonderful.
for being our presenter.
Yeah, thank you so much. So hello everyone. I think most people who are in the room today know who I am, but I'll introduce myself for those who might watch afterwards. My name is Lisa Bland, and today I'm presenting my proposed research. My hope is to take about 25 minutes to review proposed research, including a brief literature review, research aims, foundational principles, and some methodology and methods. This presentation is delivered from the Mi'kmaq territory and the ancestral and unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people, which is also home to an African Nova Scotian community which has thrived for 400 years. I am proud to be an 8th generation African Nova Scotian and 10th generation Acadian settler, and it is a profound privilege to share this learning experience, and I extend my gratitude to the land and my ancestors who have supported me to get to this point. The title of my presentation today is Understanding Storied Experiences with Menstruation of African Nova Scotian Young Adults, a Narrative Inquiry. And you'll see on screen there, I have mentioned my supervisor for the MSc and thesis program is Dr. Lisa Goldberg, so thank you very much to her for her guidance and support. Today's objectives are to introduce the concept of menstrual equity and discuss barriers to equity in menstruation, which is one of the earliest and most enduring aspects of our reproductive health, as they are faced by African Nova Scotians. We'll review a selection of the existing literature and identify any gaps in current research. And then, as I said, I'll share my proposed research and outline some of my anticipated outcomes. So this passion for menstrual health and menstrual equity emerges from my nursing career and my passion for African Nova Scotian health. I began working in perinatal and gynecology units back in 2009, and I have loved reproductive health and justice ever since. In particular, I have observed how despite common menstrual pain is and how common heavy bleeding is in African Nova Scotian communities, it remains a cultural taboo to discuss it. The poignant quote that I have on screen illustrates this well. We have to get over the facade that we need to endure everything just because periods are a normal part of our bodies. This came from a study in 2024 with Orellana et al. So pain and heavy bleeding are considered normal, and it is often a silent burden that is carried. Health literacy, which is compounded by historic and present-day inequities, and the abutting systemic and structural anti-Black racism, contributes to a normalization of menstrual pain and heavy bleeding. As I'll share in my review of the literature, this positionality is important because as we move into research methodologies, narrative inquirers are embedded within the work and reflexiveness becomes a part of the collected data. So across the literature, there are 3 main intersecting issues which shape menstrual equity. First, we have the normalization of pain, financial burden and period poverty, and systemic and structural anti-Black racism as it impacts health. So there is a slow rise in Canadian research related to the pillars of menstrual health, including period poverty and menstrual health literacy. However, much of the research related to people of African descent still comes from the United States. Research shows that people of African descent experience higher rates of heavy bleeding and pain, potentially linking hormonal differences and early menarche. Yet these concerns are often frequently dismissed due to provider bias and anti-Black racism that's embedded within healthcare. We also see period poverty impacting menstrual equity. Canadians on the whole spend approximately $10,000 or more in their lifetimes on menstrual products, so things like pads and underwear and tampons, etc. This number can be quite a lot higher for people of African descent when you consider that we have higher rates of heavy menstrual bleeding. A Nova Scotian study found that 1 in 3 women struggled to afford menstrual products, and furthermore, 70% missed school due to missed school and leisure activities due to menstruation. Additionally, the impact abuts with menstrual literacy as we look at the misuse of menstrual products. So, for example, risky use such as extended tampon use beyond the recommended durations. We almost have no research that specifically looks at African Nova Scotians or Black Canadians in relation to menstrual health and menstrual equity. Uh, and that seems to be there despite the distinct population of African Nova Scotians who have a unique historical and current experience of racism. African Nova Scotians are a distinct people with a land-based ancestry and descend from over 52 historic Black communities. And we have faced economic disenfranchisement, targeted discriminatory practices across education, health, justice, and more. So as I alluded to, there's a real literature gap related to the impacts of intersections of race, gender, sex, and class within African Nova Scotians, and really with any people of African descent in Canada when you're looking at menstrual health. This research gap is a real bellwether, and it calls attention to systemic and structural systems of anti-Black racism and sexism, particularly as research that's focused on Black Canadians has not increased during the international decade for people of African descent. And we're now on the other side of that decade, and we have not really seen an increase. These gaps have real implications for health equity, early detection of conditions with abnormal menstrual bleeding, for example, uterine fibroids, and culturally relevant menstrual health education. So we'll talk now about my proposed research, which asks what are the stories of African Nova Scotian young adults regarding menstruation against the backdrop of African Nova Scotian identity and menstrual equity. This qualitative narrative study aims to understand the experiences of African Nova Scotian young adults about menstruation and how their narrated life stories link to African Nova Scotian identity, gender, menstrual equity, and the normalization of menstrual pain. 2, I aim to identify menstrual health-related knowledge gaps. And 3, identify recommendations for future education, health education, and menstrual equity achievement. So we'll move to looking at my theoretical underpinnings. This research uses the theoretical frameworks of Black feminist and critical caring theories to underpin the research and allows for emancipatory practice through storytelling of African Nova Scotian young adults, both as individuals and through the collective struggle of anti-Blackness. As I'll mention throughout my discussion on narrative research, African Nova Scotians are uniquely tied to stories, and there's a real cultural connection to telling our stories and seeing ourselves within work to make it relevant to us. So Black feminist theory centers the realities of Black people and their gendered experiences. intersecting complexities of race, sex, gender, and class. And it explores structural and systemic factors that influence the treatment of Black persons, including cis women, trans men, and non-binary individuals. It also connects directly to reproductive justice, making it a natural theoretical underpinning for research on menstrual equity. Early theorists include Sojourner Truth, Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins, and Canadian theorists Massaquoi and Wayne, contributing to the Canadian Black feminist perspective. Secondly, I'll be using critical caring theory, which emphasizes a relational practice, social justice, and creating caring environments where healing and empowerment are potentiated. It is a mid-range nursing theory which aligns with nursing's code of ethics and responsibility to address systemic and structural inequality and to co-create knowledge with communities. It emphasizes culturally relevant health education and shared power with our patients rather than over them. So I'm going to get into a little bit more about Black feminist theory and some of the ontology and epistemology. So as I mentioned, it has some early theorists arising from Sojourner Truth, who was a nurse, and then prominent theorists such as Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins through the 70s and 80s. Black feminist theory is really focused on that intersecting complexities, and it fits well for African Nova Scotians who are facing their own set of intersecting complexities related to race and sex and gender and class. And it places value on the individual, which is essential when we are working with a group of distinct people who have not been fully recognized as such. So Black feminist theory, among other race theories and Black theories, stands out because of this intersection with reproductive health and menstruation. And so it's a relevant and applicable theoretical framework to apply to African Nova Scotians. And critical caring theory acts as my epistemology. Uh, It is a descriptive nursing theory which guides public health nursing practice and personally brings together my way of knowing, being, and doing in nursing. It focuses on providing caring environments as intentional places for exploration and healing of the whole self as a part of an emancipatory practice, something that I see as essential for African Nova Scotians. While nurses are paying attention, critical attention, excuse me, to social justice as a part of caring for others. It's rooted in 18th and 19th century nurses, and as you can see on the graphic from Falk Raphael, it specifically notes Florence Nightingale, who did care for community members and recognized the adverse impact of social factors on health. Critical, critical caring takes roots from Nightingale and other nurses like her, critical feminist theories, caring science theory, and emancipatory practice models, and it blends the work of nursing to focus on healing that's collective and individual. Now, as much as I love critical caring theory, I have to also offer a critique in that it offers only a specific reference to Nightingale as a foundational nurse in its graphic and in a lot of its writing. Critical theories draw heavily on the abolitionist and feminist work of nurses, including Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. And so I find it disappointing that they are not referenced in this tree as it branches up into critical caring theory. Critical caring is relational. It is mutual and it recognizes that shared power and active participation of the nurse and participants help address social justice issues. Critical caring uses guidelines known as curative health promoting processes, which are in the leaves of the tree, and they highlight, excuse me, critical caring highlights that the environment for data collection processes must be supportive and build capacity. So this provides a really great framework for nurses entering into research. And I think that's an important piece to highlight is that this caring model, while initially sort of explored for clinical nursing practice, I think is a really great model for engaging in research with communities where participation as a group is valued, where reciprocal information is valued. So this becomes a really important guide. Now, I will apologize. My graphic did not download correctly from Canva. Um, so imagine that that is a beautiful circle, and I'll speak about my methodology. So Clendenin and Connolly's narrative inquiry is narrative methodology, which guides the proposed research and is further influenced from Afrocentric narrative inquiries through Berry and Cook. Narrative inquiry is a way of understanding and inquiring into an experience. Narrative researchers are positioned within the work and relate to the work. Narrative recognizes that stories are personal, social, cultural, and structural, and it examines these within living a story with the participant and then reliving it in the retelling phase. Researchers adopt a reflexive approach with techniques such as note-taking and journaling to enhance trustworthiness of their findings. Key elements of this method include the concepts of temporality, sociality, and place. So Clendenin and Connolly argue that we live within our stories and we live by our stories. Stories have a time to them. That's the temporal piece, and it brings us into a present moment with a story from our past, and it carries us forward with the information that we've gained from that. Sociality is where the personal and the social are in relation, and then the narrative inquirer is situated in relation to the participant. So that can kind of highlight for us that the inquirer must consider themselves within and during data collection and analysis. Finally, we look at place. All events occur in relation to place, and this sheds light on the intersections of systemic and structural systems of oppression as they are related to by participants sharing their menstruation stories. Berry and Cook identify these as counter stories which serve to challenge mainstream narratives and amplify voices of marginalized people. Narratives from people of African descent challenge a master narrative of commonly held beliefs, biases, and assumptions. Narrative research also involves collaboratively retelling stories, which involves an intimate study of the narrative with participants becoming the inquirers, sharing it back to the researcher and adding to the richness of the story. Narrative inquiry is important to this project because of the stories shaped as personal and cultural. African Nova Scotians have a rich history of storytelling, and this is seen in research, particularly when you're looking at work from, for example, Dr. Ingrid Waldron and the environmental racism work that has been featured so strongly with the documentary, There's Something in the Water. So those kinds of storytelling methods provide another way for African Nova Scotians to see themselves within the work and to have some ownership of the creative process. Importantly, I want to highlight that there is a real absence of menstruation stories, and this really hints at the opportunity to co-create new narratives together. So I'll just briefly run through my proposed research process. Obviously, we begin with identifying the research interest, followed by developing a design and collaboration. Uh, so I conducted a preliminary literature review to define my research question and identify gaps in existing knowledge. I then involved some collaboration, and I've been working with the Period Equity Alliance Society from early on to ground the research in Black feminist and critical caring theories, which both emphasize the community involvement of African Nova Scotian partners. This partnership refines the study design as it aligns with community needs, emphasizing research governance and beneficence. So for example, the Period Equity Alliance Society has sort of shaped what I'm thinking about doing when I'm at the participant focus group phase, and has encouraged an expansion of the day beyond just the focus groups to provide something that is really reciprocal for community. Next, we have ethical approval, which will be sought in consideration of past harm experienced by African Nova Scotians in research, necessitating careful consideration of potential risks. Um, Community partners will support this through review of the methodology and consent materials to address mistrust. And I'll speak a little bit more on the next slide to some strategies that I found important in trying to reduce risk of harm. Data collection is going to occur through semi-structured interviews and will capture narratives of menstruation among African Nova Scotian young adults, again with analysis conducted in partnership with the focus groups. Um, and then the research aims to provide insights into African Nova Scotian identity related to menstruation, culminating in knowledge mobilization and menstrual health education that is really driven by community decision making. So as I mentioned, the proposed research, I've considered some of the important strategies for mitigating harm for participants and the researcher. So throughout the research process, I'll be engaging in critical self-reflexivity, transcript review, and reciprocity to mitigate harm to African Nova Scotian participants. Self-reflexivity, both prior to and during interactions, will be essential to ensuring that I am remaining in step with the desires and the stories of the participants, while also providing me with an opportunity to make some critical self-reflection that generates additional information for the study. Um, I'll also be regularly questioning the significance of the research and justifying its importance on personal, practical, and social levels. So this is something that Clendenin and Connolly really encourage to ensure that our research is still aligning for ourselves and for participants. Critical self-reflection of biases and examining how research challenges the dominant narratives helps to address the systems of oppression. And finally, in uh, conjunction with critical self-reflexivity, I'll be having regular meetings with my supervisor and engaging in that self-reflective journaling to help prevent harm to myself as well, because I'm also an African Nova Scotian woman who's experienced a lot of these concerns with menstruation issues. So this is something that I have to navigate as well. So during the review of data collection transcripts, the researcher will immerse themselves into the milieu or into the stories of the narrative, living within and living by the narrative to understand both what is said and unsaid. So during transcript review, that real immersion occurs through reading and rereading regular revisions of, excuse me, not revisions, regular reviews of the transcript. Um, Finally, I'll mention reciprocity as a strategy to mitigate harm. So reciprocity simply means that the research work has to equitably benefit both the community and the researcher. And interestingly, Banks, Berry, and Cook all speak about the need to have the initial emphasis on identifying and prioritizing the needs of community first before the research, which is something that really resonates for me. And so while I very much value and find my research important, it is just as important, if not more so, to ensure that the community is getting something valuable out of it. So to that regard, outputs will be developed with participants and community partners through the focus groups. Reciprocity really underscores the importance of the immediate benefits, which will be addressed through focus groups and a community reproductive health workshop in collaboration with the Period Equity Alliance Society. So the proposed research will recruit 12 African Nova Scotian young adults aged 18 to 25 who menstruate. Participants have to self-identify as African Nova Scotian following the African Nova Scotian strategy definition, i.e. they have to have that descent from the 52 historic African Nova Scotian communities. There will be no assumptions regarding sex or gender, um, inviting any participants who have menstruated, whether they are cis women, trans men, or non-binary individuals, to participate. Recruitment will occur in collaboration with the Period Equity Alliance Society, which is an African Nova Scotian organization dedicated to addressing period poverty. Data collection and analysis will occur through semi-structured one-on-one interviews in home and community space settings, largely throughout HRM and the Windsor area. Retelling will occur through participant focus groups. And as I mentioned, the Period Equity Alliance Society is very much interested in having that focus group be a component of a broader women's health event that could span the course of a full day. Critical analysis and interpretation of findings will occur with real consideration to the African Nova Scotian identity, sex, gender, and collective experiences of systemic and structural oppression. So, using Black feminist and critical caring theories, I anticipate that this narrative inquiry will prioritize the stories of African Nova Scotian young adults, encouraging their active participation in exploring what their experiences are like. It challenges dominant narratives and taboos, and fosters connections to community culture and self-identity. The goal overall is to invite participants to reflect on their collective stories and develop resources that will promote menstrual equity within African Nova Scotian communities. In consideration of potential outcomes, beyond publication and my achievement of my MSCN, my hope is that this research will generate culturally significant knowledge outputs in partnerships with communities. So this could be arts-based outputs that address menstrual health education and challenge the taboo and normalization of menstrual pain, while focusing on the needs and priorities of African Nova Scotian young adults, or it could be taken in a completely different direction based on the participants and what their desires are. Early education regarding normal menstruation can aid in the early diagnosis and timely treatment of abnormal uterine bleeding and uterine conditions such as fibroids. And so my hope is that this work will encourage some of that early detection by increasing that menstrual health literacy. So I want to thank you for your time today, and I want to especially thank Missy Simon-Searle, who is with the Period Equity Alliance Society, for their commitment to menstrual equity and to African Nova Scotian communities, and also just briefly say thank you to my funders of my graduate studies. And I'll close my presentation now and open the floor for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Yes, we'll turn it over to the audience to see what type of
There we go.
questions and comments that you have. Awesome. I have questions too, but I will wait to see if anyone else has them before me.
I'm going to guess Lisa does.
Well, I mean, it was just spectacular. And I know I have a bias, but I do think it's an absolutely spectacular presentation. Just incredible work, Lisa. I was thinking of a couple of things, and they're more just comments and thoughts. It was really interesting. You know, I was obsessed watching the Olympics. And I don't know if you knew this, but one of the American figure skaters, Amber Glenn, who is a member of the 2S LGBTQ plus community, she did get a lot of hate on that, but she talked openly about being on her period. And I thought it was so interesting that she talked about it, you know, how physically and emotionally she was affected by that. And she felt very strongly that this should not be an individual experience. This should be a collective for, she talked about female athletes. Of course, I would just say, and I know you would, athletes who menstruate. So I'm just curious, your thoughts on, you know, does that offer something when it becomes more public and talked about, and the implications of that for research like yours, particularly with young adults who are African Nova Scotian, like what are the implications of someone who has a spotlight like that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I remember watching a replay of it and thinking how exciting it was that somebody
Yeah.
was talking about menstruation and, normalizing some of the difficulties that can be faced from premenstrual syndrome on such a global scale.
Yeah.
There's some really interesting research that looks at menstruation amongst people who are involved in competitive sport.
Yeah.
And part of the challenge is the normalization of um, menstrual health pain or normalization of menstrual pain, excuse me. And it's been really fascinating to watch that develop because the critical piece of that is that the voices of marginalized people are often not represented, particularly racialized people are
Yeah.
not represented in that conversation. There's some really great research out of Australia that's looking at menstrual health literacy levels and assessing those in low and middle income countries, and then that's slowly being adapted for use in high income countries. And so I think that will also present some interesting work. The the key thing that's really exciting for me, Lisa, is that there's that public face to
Mm.
menstruation. Um, but I worry that the cultural taboo and stigmatizing of menstruation amongst populations will still limit its usefulness, you know.
Mm.
So my concern is that public um, announcements about menstruation will sort of address one aspect of menstrual
Mm.
health literacy, but it may not address stigma, and it may
Yeah.
not increase how often people are speaking about it in their homes.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa.
Anybody else? I'm just going to jump right in and people can follow up too. But yeah, great presentation. I always love listening to your presentations, Lisa, and I've listened to a couple of them at least.
Thank
Um,
you.
I I really enjoyed listening to you talk about theory and methodology. It just made so much sense the way that you
Yeah.
explained it. So really appreciating that. So from Black feminist
Hmm.
and just the idea of reproductive justice and what
Yeah.
that can do. Also note, and this is something that I deal with too, a lot of the scholars are from many, many decades ago. And I think
Yes.
I love that because it's so foundational and tried and true that
Hmm.
the theory is still here and can really, really make an
Yeah.
impact. I'm not so familiar with Wade and is it McCall?
Mascoy. They're
McCoy.
they're sort of on the forefront of Canadian Black feminist thought.
Hmm.
So they had some phenomenal work published back in 2007
Okay.
that spoke about how we take this, Black feminist theory, which was really developed within that African American context, which has different historical legacies with slavery and Jim Crow and all of those pieces, and is applying it within a Canadian context so that it is a little bit more relevant. They're from Montreal, so there's a real connection to Haitian communities, for example, and that voice wasn't really present in Black feminist theory within American context. So it's exciting to see some application of this theory within Canada as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and just to
Yeah.
be able to promote that, and then you will be doing the same, taking this and
Yeah.
applying and just and showing us how is the best way to use this. So,
Hmm.
anyways, just loved your explanation. And so pairing that with narrative inquiry, so I'm always
Yeah.
questioning. Um, so anyway, you explained it really, really well. And sometimes I wonder, well, could Black feminist theory stand on its own? And,
Mm.
just explaining the reasons why other theories are paired with it. So if you
Yeah.
just expand on that just a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that there's growing support for Black feminist theory as its own foundational theory and research methodology. The reason that I pair it with narrative inquiry is really because of this African Nova Scotian context with storytelling. You know, our communities have a rich history of oral storytelling, our own methods of archival systems. You know, I'm thinking about stories that are told in the margins of Bibles. You know, I'm
Mm.
thinking of, you know, my grandparents have a Bible that has been passed on and it has stories in the margins and newspaper clippings and this sort of ongoing collection of stories and resources that are really uniquely specific to our land, like land-based communities. Um, so that's why narrative is woven in, because it's really important that those stories are also there. It's not simply the critical examination of how uh, people are intersecting. It's also a collective storytelling exercise.
Hmm.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, lots of learning for all of us. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, anybody else?
Well, of course, I'll ask something else, but I
Yeah.
want other people to ask something because I can ask Lisa something anytime. Yeah. Does anyone else want to ask something? No? Um, so Lisa, and I might have asked this before, you brought up Florence, which I know is important, and you went to the critical caring and why is it that the abolitionists aren't in there, which I
Mhm.
think is deeply flawed.
Yes.
And we in 50/50 the other day, Olivia joined us with Cameron to talk about racism, past, present, and future. And that was one of our discussions about Florence Nightingale. So I just wonder, might it be helpful, especially for people who might be hearing this the first time, to say something a little more about Florence Nightingale and the challenges, even if it's, for a few minutes to talk about her colonial and racist views and why it's so important to have Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth with there, and even someone like Mary Seacole, who was Florence's contemporary at the time. Any thoughts? Just because I know it's important to still mention Florence Nightingale, but also to tell the audience, because you never know who's in your audience, right? And for some
Sure.
people, they may only for the first time realize the challenges
Yeah.
with Florence Nightingale. Just so, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you raise a good point, Lisa. You know, and I'll think about how I can incorporate this into my next presentation, just so
Yeah.
that there's a little bit more of a critical element for people who may not be aware of some of the problematic pieces of upholding, I'll say upholding one particular nurse as a foundation for a
Yeah.
profession. You know, and I think that's true for several professions. When one individual is upheld, and then you recognize through sort of
Yeah.
uncovering of history that they are deeply flawed, that
Yeah.
can present almost an identity crisis for nursing.
Yeah.
Um, so, you know, one of the things I'd recommend maybe is for for people who have not really explored the history of other foundational nurses, starting with something like Nursing Cleo and the
Mm,
blog piece, The Racist Lady with the
yeah.
Lamp, is a really reasonable spot to start. And it speaks about some of the challenges that are presented with Florence Nightingale. So,
Mm,
you know, while she had, you know, this sort of foundational piece around um, external factors for a person impacting their health,
mm,
um, and that sort of early critical lens, she was also heavily critical of people who didn't look like her, weren't from the same class as her, you know, and that led to issues with, you know, inviting Mary Seacole, this phenomenal Jamaican nurse who really developed the triaging system that's still used today. Um, she was sort of left out of that conversation in the Crimean War initially.
yeah.
And so I think, you know, we have to sort of acknowledge those challenges with upholding one person and only one person. And so I often try to, when I'm introducing the theories that I use, I try not to limit it to only speaking about one,
Yeah.
because it's never coming from one person's voice.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but I think you're right, it's deeply flawed to not recognize that critical theories have started really in, sort of very early American nursing history with abolitionist nurses.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. And especially when you go to the caring science
Hmm.
um, to present, I
Yeah.
think it'll be so important to mention the
Yeah.
abolitionist nurses
Yes.
and, speaking of the brilliant nurses of color, because still a number of the caring science folks
Hmm.
still do not have the multiplicity of perspectives
Yeah.
of those nurses. So I think
Hmm.
this brilliant work will really, I think inspire others to think about how to come to this with a variety of perspectives, which I think, again, is another wonderful element of the work you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
So
you.
I think that's great. Yeah. Thanks, Lisa.
So much to talk about. I'm so excited for you to do your research and continue to share.
Yeah, thank you. So am I.
Yeah, and it's just wonderful. I think it's a great example for other graduate students to share what they're learning along the way and not just wait till the end. So I have definitely learned a lot from your literature review and just your critical perspectives. And yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who's attended in person and live. Appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah, it will be posted, and yeah, everyone else will be able to continue to enjoy watching this. So thank you. All right, well, we'll let everyone go. Thank you for coming, everyone.